First on our list is the duality between subjective and objective, or subject and object. This is a very tricky duality that is at the very heart of science and materialist metaphysics, and just the conventional dualistic way of seeing the world. So conventionally, we're born, and then we start to think like, well, there's me, and there's the rest of the world. I am the subject, the rest of the world is the object, and I can have my own subjective personal experiences, but then there's like objective facts, the objective universe out there, which is separate from me, the subject. And then let's go about doing science. And then when we start doing science, of course, we run into this tricky problem of like, well, is this evidence that we have for some scientific theory, is this evidence subjective evidence or is it objective evidence? And then, of course, within science, we like to privilege the objective over the subjective. Somehow, if it's a subjective piece of evidence, then somehow that's not really true or valid because it must be objective. Of course, not realizing that all objective evidence or any notion of objectivity whatsoever that you might have, and any objective objects, even, take a physical object like a chair or a table, it is only accessible to you as a subjective experience. And so ultimately, if you want to get technical, the only thing that there is subjective experience. There's no such thing as objectivity in the way that science or mainstream culture holds it as. So in fact, objectivity is couched within subjectivity in this sense. This makes the entire enterprise of acquiring knowledge and figuring out how reality works very, very tricky and very counterintuitive and twisted in unexpected ways. So for example, 100 years ago, with the development of quantum mechanics, what good physicists realized, the ones who were actually working on quantum mechanics and had an open mind and who were visionaries, people like Niels Bohr and Schrödinger, Einstein, Planck, and others, what they realized is that, wait a minute, the way we were doing physics before, and science as a whole before, where we were assuming that our measurements of the universe can be separated from ourselves and our instruments, as if there's like a physical object out there and I can just measure how long it is using a ruler. And it doesn't matter whether I'm a human or what kind of instrumentation I'm using, or consciousness doesn't play any role into this. No, what they discovered is it's all intimately entangled and interconnected. And most people today, 100 years later, still don't understand, most scientists today still don't understand just how radical quantum mechanics is. If you want to understand that in more depth, go check out my multiple-part series called Quantum Mechanics Debunks Materialism, where I go into a lot of depth about the details of that. It's a little tricky, but basically what they discovered is that when you're making a measurement of a molecule or an atom or some subatomic particle, the very fact that you're measuring it itself affects the object that you're measuring, such that you can't even say that there's a you and an object, or a measuring device and an object. They're literally one. It's all entangled. And that was, of course, a radical and very important discovery that still hasn't percolated through mainstream culture. People don't realize the significance, in particular, the metaphysical ramifications and the epistemological ramifications of this discovery. But the folks who were working on it, they understood. It was extremely radical, extremely radical. So what happens as you're going deeper into personal development and ultimately spirituality is that you start to realize that the line between subjects and objects literally starts to disappear, where once you thought it was unquestionable, such that literally a physical object that you're looking at, a table, a car, a cat, or your parents, somebody you love, another person, a clerk at the grocery store, you look at them and you actually are so conscious now, beyond ordinary human consciousness, you're now entering a non-dual state of consciousness where you literally perceive that person's face or that physical object as being not just an object, but also simultaneously a subject. So in a sense, every physical object in the universe is self-illuminated, self-knowing, self-aware. Awareness is not localized within a human being or a human brain or within yourself. Awareness is omnipresent, and it's literally everywhere and everything, such that you aren't looking at the table, you are the table. Now, of course, it might not feel to you that way right now if you're only beginning this journey. That's because you haven't done enough concentration work. And you haven't shifted your state of consciousness enough to realize this. It's a very radical shift. Requires quite a bit of concentration work to be able to access it. And so ultimately what you realize with spirituality, and the reason we call it spirituality at all, and why we call it spirit, is that the entire universe is one subject. It's a subject of itself. The subject and object are one. You can't split them apart. And this is quite counterintuitive, because you might wonder, well, how could there be a subject without an object? Or how can there be an object without a subject? Well, it turns out it can. You can transcend subject and object into an absolute third kind, like we talked about in parts 1 and 2, which is absolute subjectivity. Absolute subjectivity. So that's absolute with a capital A, subjectivity with a capital S. And when you realize that, you realize, holy shit, everything is spirit. Everything is God. Everything is a subject. The subject was never located inside of a body. The subject was the entire room the whole time. Everywhere you go is the subject. You are the subject. There is only one subject in the entire universe, and that subject is God. That subject is looking through every being, every human being, every animal, every bacteria, every sentient and non-sentient creature across the entire universe. And if there are multiple universes, it's looking through multiple universes. There's only one subject, and you are that subject in this human form that you're in right now. And that's what you realize. And there you have transcended the subject and object with a lowercase s and a lowercase o.